Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Power of Life show on the World Puja Network. This is your host, Maureen Moss. I am delighted to welcome back to World Puja Dr. Stephen Greer, best known for his mind-boggling, globally acclaimed book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, proving to the world his amazing commitment to penetrating the shadowed corners of U.S. government and corporate cover-up. Dr. Greer is also the founder and president of the Disclosure Project, which I know many of you know about and have written lots of letters to us at World Puja about. And it's a nonprofit research project working to fully disclose the facts, not lies, about UFOs, extraterrestrial intelligence, and classified advanced energy and propulsion systems. Dr. Greer reminds us that in 1993, he started an effort that was designed to identify firsthand military and government witnesses to UFO events and projects, as well as other evidence to be used in a public disclosure. And he continues on to bring forth transcendent truths as a call to action to shift the paradigm from terrestrial tyranny to peaceful, sustainable, and cosmic community. Now Dr. Stephen Greer has created the Orion Project to add unto his Disclosure Project, and we will discuss both of them at length tonight. I want to remind everybody, of course, that you can listen to two or three other archives that Dr. Stephen Greer did on World Puja in this past year, and his websites are disclosureproject.org and orionproject.org. Welcome, Stephen.
Oh, glad to be here. And by the way, the Orion Project, you have to put the "the" in there. It's the Orion Project.
Thank you very much. Yes. The Orion Project, yes. ORION,
right.
PROJECT.org. Thanks for correcting that.
Okay.
So before we discuss your latest project, I wanted to talk with you, Stephen, actually, because I've received so many letters from our audience asking me to ask you just a few questions from Hidden Truth and Forbidden Knowledge, and then we will be on to the Orion Project, if that's all right with you.
That's great.
Fantastic. So in Hidden Truth and Forbidden Knowledge, you write the UFO phenomenon tells us more about ourselves than about our mysterious visitors, and the mirror, actually, you said that they hold in front of us is frightening yet hopeful. Will you share insight to that statement, Stephen?
Yes, what I think it is that what you find is that a lot of people anthropocentrically project the human condition on the presence of these other civilizations, which are actually extremely enlightened and understand cosmic consciousness, because you cannot travel through interstellar distances without having unraveled the singular truth that there's a nexus where the conscious mind, and this is where the Vedas come in, the understanding of where the conscious mind and the spectrum of space, time, electromagnetism, and energy are all coming together. And so many people will see the manifestations of these advanced extraterrestrial civilizations, and they'll be either concerned or they won't understand it, and in their either fear or ignorance, they will project human motives onto them. On the other hand, if someone's in a state of enlightenment, they can see where they are actually coming from. And so many of the things you see out there in the public about the extraterrestrial presence, I think, is it's almost like a Rorschach test, where people are projecting their own state of awareness onto these other civilizations, because that is the natural response of humans when they're facing things they don't fully understand. And so that's why knowledge, as it says in the Vedas, is the greatest purifier, that you have to attain a certain level of conscious knowledge and enlightenment to be able to even understand why these visitors are here, and to also understand what their intent and purpose is. And I think that's something that there's so much confusion around, because in a world that's filled with so much conflict and war and violence and what have you, that we tend to project onto what we don't understand all of these fears that are in the collective consciousness of humans, but in our own personal experience as well. And so I find it very interesting, having dealt with this issue now in a public way for 18 years, to see that if you're a militarist, you project a military threat onto the presence when there is none. If you're someone, so it sort of is a big cosmic mirror in a sense, and it says a lot more about us than anything else.
So let me ask you this, Stephen. When you said that, in the Vedic tradition, it's about really gleaning wisdom to understand how consciousness works, right?
Correct.
And so, and in doing so, in the Vedic tradition, how would one glean the wisdom necessary to be in the presence of an extraterrestrial and not have a negative reaction?
I think that, this is what we take people. If you go to cseti.org, cseti.org, that's our nonprofit. That's the parent organization of disclosureproject.org. And that organization, which is what I originally founded, we actually train people in these week-long intensives that's open to the public, where the first thing we do is do a puja and initiate people into meditation techniques to enter into a higher state of consciousness, because only when you understand the universal aspect of your own self, truly, not just intellectually, but experience it, can you then understand these other civilizations who have had to cross this chasm from the linear to the non-local, from the time-space fixation to this unboundedness of consciousness. And the Vedas and the science of consciousness, if I can use that term,
sure,
is really the greatest repository of understanding that. And if one really wants to be an ambassador to the universe, which is what we call these training programs at cseti.org, that is the state that you must be in. You have to be able to understand the essential oneness of the conscious mind. What Erwin Schrödinger, who was the father of modern particle wave theory, but it became quantum mechanics, he said the total number of minds in the universe is one. That is, that it's a singularity. And there's one conscious mind shining through the window of each of our souls. And each of our souls, these windows that are our individualities, are like a beautiful a cathedral that has all these trillions and infinite number of windows that are all different shapes, colors, sizes, and what have you, but the light going through those windows is a singularity, and that's the conscious mind whereby we're all awake. And that's the essential thing to understand and then experience that state of oneness, because then when you are with these extraterrestrial people and you have these encounters, you're not freaked out because of your linearity and your little small animal mind state. You're in this state of cosmic awareness, and you see that's who they are. So when you look into the eyes of these other beings, you see, well, we're actually one being, and there's one conscious light streaming through all of us. And this is not just a human experience, it's a universal experience. And that is the foundation of becoming a true ambassador to these civilizations, which is what's urgently needed, because they're obviously here. They're concerned about the development of human life on this planet, and the only way we're going to be able to understand and relate to them is to understand the universality of mind, the universality of consciousness.
You know, that you brought that up, the universality of mind and consciousness. Would it assist, do you think, Stephen, if we considered how necessary it is for us to have that one mind, to participate in that one mind consciousness, because it's the same down here on planet Earth. We have this subdivision between those that we call quote-unquote dark beings, those that we call light, those that are good, those that are not good. And do we transfer that same consciousness into the extraterrestrial community as kind of like as is above, so is below?
Well, I think people do that in ignorance because they don't understand that there's a universal order, and that is no civilization is allowed to leave their biosphere, their physical planet, until they've attained a state of peacefulness. And that is an absolute universal requirement. And the proof of it is that our advanced classified projects at Lockheed Skunk Works and other projects that we have penetrated have technologies that can go interstellar, but they're not allowed to use them because these extraterrestrial civilizations are saying, no, wait, you have to reach a certain level of evolution before you're safe to go bamming around out in the universe amongst other planets. And we know that this has been the case since for eons, for billions of years. I think that this is something that there is a certain order to the cosmos, and people have all these sort of fears while they're here. Now, people often confuse astral beings or lower astral energies with these extraterrestrial, and I'm being very specific about advanced technological, physical extraterrestrial life forms, those aren't allowed to leave their biosphere, never mind their solar system, until they've reached a certain level of enlightenment and peacefulness. And that is if you will, a rite of passage that every civilization must go through. And we're at that point right now where we're passing from our childhood and adolescence as a civilization to our state of maturity, the hallmark of which is world peace and universal peace. And so that's really where we are. That's the big picture where humanity stands at a crossroads at this time.
I think one of the things that you just said is really important to discern the difference between the lower astral energies versus the higher civilizations of the extraterrestrials. Because I think there's a lot of confusion, Stephen, between the two, and that's where the extraterrestrial civilizations get a bad rap, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely, and I think this is one of the things I try to elucidate in the cosmology that I've described in Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which, by the way, people can get at disclosureproject.org. And it goes very deeply into this whole concept, and there is a conflation of everything that goes bump in the night being extraterrestrial, and it isn't. And I think that the other big issue is that there are classified projects that are running copycat programs that are using really advanced aircraft, are using electronics that interface with consciousness, that are using all kinds of advanced weird stuff to hoax a threat from outer space, because as Wernher von Braun, who invented the V-2 rocket for Hitler, said, he said this to his right-hand person before he died, they were wanting to create, through the disinformation within the UFO subculture, the foundation for eventually weaponizing space and having an expansion of the whole militarism that we see on planet Earth into space, so that the world can be united around a militaristic global junta, if you will, a military perspective. And so people are very, very susceptible, I believe, to the disinformation that's put out there by humans, and at the same time the confusion of the cosmology, because you have to understand, if an extraterrestrial civilization can go beyond the speed of light, and I call this the crossing point of light, what the ability to resonantly shift your spacecraft and everyone and everything in it beyond the speed of light, they're operating in that, some would call it etheric, but on that astral level of energy. They're no longer solid material. And so they have certainly an understanding of that cosmology, and we must understand it as well. But what that also means is that the way that extraterrestrials can appear and disappear can look very similar in some respects to how some of these other astral realities do, but they're not at all the same thing. But people conflate them. And so this is, again, where knowledge becomes the greatest purifier, because you have to have a certain detailed knowledge of the architecture, if I can use that concept, of consciousness, of the astral cosmos, the material cosmos, and the sciences that pertain to all of that, to really understand this entire area of extraterrestrial intelligence. And I think that what you see a lot out there in books and discussions is a commingling and a confusion of these things, and it's not helpful, because often it's it's really apples and oranges, but people don't know it is. And so this is part of the educational process that we have to go through to be able to intelligently comprehend the actual extraterrestrial civilizations that are trying to interface with us.
So how do we discern, Stephen, as you put it, and I will know it, the copycat programs that are being created, that are created right now, not just in technology, but even the copycat programs of human beings?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, one of them, I have a whole group of military guys that I've worked with, and that I continue to have an expanding network of these gentlemen who have worked within the corporate world primarily, but also within certain compartmented operations, where they have used ET-looking like robots, what are called alien reproduction vehicles, these things that look like flying saucers that are made at Lockheed Skunk Works, and have used all kinds of advanced technologies to for example, quote, abduct people and to create the seeds of fear and doubt. And people go, is that really possible? I said, oh, yeah, they've had that ability since at least the 50s. And they've been doing it. And the reason they've been doing it is that one of these Army Rangers that I dealt with, who was on a team, a squad that did this, he said, well, you wouldn't believe how many senior military and even political people have had these kinds of staged encounters done by humans to look, quote, alien, so that they would support the secret Star Wars program and support the secret agenda of creating conflict with these civilizations in space. It's a very slick program, and most people, here's something that's very counterintuitive. The truth is more bizarre than the fiction being put out there, and so it hides itself. The truth hides itself in terms of how deeply convoluted these ridiculous programs are. But once you understand what the agenda is behind it, it's not hard to figure it out, and it's also not it isn't at all difficult to figure out the difference between a pseudo ET event and an actual one, because the civilizations that are coming here from interstellar distances, they simply don't have that need. I mean, obviously, if they're able to get here, and there's very clearly a universal order that's very enforced by incredibly powerful and enlightened civilizations, they're not coming here doing stuff that are at all harmful. They wouldn't be allowed to. Just like when we landed on the moon, my uncle designed the lunar module.
Really?
Yeah, they put the first man on the moon.
Oh,
and that's when as a child, I knew about all this stuff. And this is all in my book, Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, which is a bit of an autobiography. And
it's a phenomenal book. Phenomenal.
I think what a lot of people don't realize is that when we landed there, and Neil Armstrong later said, we were basically shooed away and warned off from going back because the ET craft that were there, they weren't really happy that the space program in the 60s had become part of the Cold War, and we were doing this competitively with the Soviet Union. That, in other words, the only way that we are really welcome in space is if we go out there as a peaceful, unified civilization. We're not welcome to go out there as competing, warring, factional, tribal craziness. And that is enforced universally. That is, and what people need to understand is that there is a certain universal order that really and truly is enforced and has been since time immemorial.
So you wrote that humanity has reached a new potential, that the warmongers, who are hell-bent on thousands of years of galactic warfare, are completely off the mark, and no matter how addicted certain retrograde elements of our society may be to the old paradigm of endless war, the time will shortly be over where we will enter into a time of unbroken peace for at least 500,000 years on Earth. How close, Stephen, are we to that? And do you believe that it will be due in great part to the election of a new president, or in spite of it?
I think the election of the president is almost immaterial. I do think it's important who our leaders are, and I'm not saying people shouldn't be engaged in that process. I do think, however, that there is a cosmic current flowing that more and more people are being brought along by, if you will, a cosmic intent, and that humanity, the Earth, as a conscious being, and I believe the Earth is, by the way, female, and the Earth is conscious, and is an actual conscious being. And in Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, I talk about an experience I had where I was out in space and had this amazing encounter with Gaia. And it was made clear to me that we're going to make this transition because it has to happen. And human civilization is not going to be destroyed. It's not going to be this sort of eschatological end of the world that everyone thinks. It may be the end of the old world, and a lot of things will change. But I think within the next few years to couple decades, we're going to see our civilization go from its current state to one of a sustainable, peaceful civilization. And the foundation of being able to continue on into the future is bringing out not only this knowledge and consciousness, but also with it at the same time the sciences, because it's not an either-or question. We can't just be enlightened and still continue to burn coal and fossil fuel.
Right.
We have to have our technologies match the consciousness, and vice versa. You see, it's interesting because the consciousness of division and destruction is mirrored by the energy systems and the technologies that are also destroying the biosphere. And so the state of consciousness of each of us and of us collectively manifests the physical world we're in. People have to understand that our state of consciousness and our thoughts and everything manifests the world. And for some people that sounds like a very crazy and abstract idea, but it's a literal truth. And I think that's why we have to start first at being in this state of consciousness and then go from there and understanding what the problem is and compassionately bring forth the solutions, including the scientific solutions that are in the material sciences, because we live in a material plane.
So as you're talking about saying in a few years or a couple decades from now, what is your perspective, Stephen, on other people's input that there's going to be a new Gaia, there's going to be a Planet 2 or a different Terra? What's your perspective on that?
Oh, no, the Earth is going to be here for a very long time yet to come as a womb for the evolution of enlightened conscious life. And so the Earth is very much here for the long haul, and so is humanity. And I think that a lot of people have these other ideas, but that's actually what they're confusing a spiritual state with the physical. The physical planet is absolutely going to be here, and humanity is going to be here. I think that it will be so different from the current state that it will seem like a completely new cosmos. And on a certain level it is. It's a renewal of civilization. But the difference between this cycle and the past ones that we know of, at least going back for a few 100,000 years, of this particular period that we've entered, is that instead of it being the Shambhala kingdom where there was enlightenment and then it fell away, or here and there and isolated, it's going to be the entire globe in a state of peace with high technology and a cosmic civilization with the entire population moving into this state of knowledge and enlightenment. Now, that's not going to happen in 10 years.
Right.
It's going to happen over the next decades and then hundreds of years and thousands of years and on and on. And I try to describe in Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge the entire overview of where we'll end up 500,000 years from now, because I've had many experiences in a state where I've gone into the future and seen these, sort of milestone events.
And in these milestone events, the current Gaia that humanity resides on right now is maintaining herself through this?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Yes. I think I really wanted to ask you that question, and I know it's been on the minds of others, because I think there's so many other things being said that Gaia is already, there's another Planet 2 already where people are being moved to, that this Gaia is going to drop off and a new one will be reborn, that through projects like Operation Terror, things like that. I think people have a hard time discerning what is really the deal here.
Well, the real deal here is that if we quit abusing her, Gaia can heal herself very quickly.
Can she? Okay.
If you look at the satellite imagery of the northeastern corridor during the Great Blackout a few years ago, within 24 hours, the air was pristine, the atmosphere was clean. Just that sector of the country moved, because there was no power plants and all those coal-fired plants and everything was shut down. Everything became clear and beautiful within a few days, a day or two. And what you see is that the Earth actually has an amazing regenerative healing capability if we quit overloading her immune system and her circulatory system and her breathing air system. And so it's an organism. I'm a medical doctor by training. I'm an emergency trauma doctor. And what I see is an Earth in a state of emergency and needs some emergency intervention. And the main thing is that we just need to lift the burden we placed on her, because, you see, we're 150 years into a carbon-based industrial revolution that should have listed 50. By 1900, Tesla and others had come out with sciences that if they had been allowed to go forward and had there not been the corruption of the big money / financial oil cartels, we would have had a civilization at peace with abundance and no pollution before anyone listening to this interview was born. We didn't do it because of a failure of leadership and a failure of our individual and collective consciousness. So we have to manifest that. And this is why I say it's very important that, well, at the one hand, I'm very involved in training people in higher states of consciousness. It's not enough to simply sit around and meditate and pray.
Right.
As important as that is, you've got to be engaged in the world, and you've got to start looking for and working, as hard and difficult as it may seem, and as great the challenge may appear to be, to find the solutions, because we know the solutions exist. If you go to the OrionProject.org, you'll see
we're going to talk about that right now.
You'll see a history of devices and of technologies that have existed since at least 1902. In fact, we have a photograph of Townsend Brown with Stubblefield, who had an Earth battery that were stakes in a ground with a special resonant generator that was pulling energy out of this so-called electromagnetic flux field that's all around us in the environment and running this man's farm. They went to Congress and showed this system, and that was 1902. Now, this is 2008 now.
Amazing.
106 years later,
Amazing.
And we're still getting 56% of our electric energy from coal-fired power plants like in the 1800s. I mean, this is absurd. And I think that, again, what we're asking for, we're launching this breakthrough campaign where, because the government and big corporations and wealthy people have opted not to fund these sort of inventors and these sort of researchers that we've identified, the ones who are now living on the Earth, we have identified the most brilliant physicists and engineers and scientists living today who are all willing to join with us in a program with the Orion Project to create these technologies and then move them strategically forward to the public. And we're saying to the public, look, we're trying to raise $3 million in the next 60 to 90 days so that we can open this facility near the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, combine all these brilliant people in one place, and within 12 to 18 months come out with these definitive solutions that we know and can prove are possible. And so the question is, I don't know how many people are listening to this interview, but let's say that there are 100,000 people. If each of those people gave a very small amount, we would be there.
Well, let's back up for 1 second and let's talk about from the gate the Orion Project, and I will talk about the budget, the $3 million budget, which you have really broken down and documented on your website. But let's talk about what was the impetus? What was it from all that you've been through and all that you've worked for decades on, Stephen, to create the Orion Project? Was it an urgency from within you, from your interaction with the extraterrestrial community? What was the urgency right now?
Well, all of that, all of the above, and the collected experience of myself, but this entire team that we've identified. What we have found is that beginning, of course, in 1993, when I was briefing President Clinton and Hillary Clinton and the CIA Director Jim Woolsey on these issues, what we found was that everyone wants to know about these issues, but no one wants to do anything about it because they're terrified of taking on these big power centers. So basically, what we're trying to do is focus on getting a new beginning where the public support this, because what we found was there are a lot of wealthy people, for example, that I've flown around on people's private jets who are billionaires. You would think that they would just write a check and say, here, go make this so. But they turn to me and they say, oh, no, this is too dangerous, or this is too risky. I'd stand out too much if I support this. But you know what? If a few thousand people contribute a modest amount to the Orion Project through a tax-deductible donation, we'll have those funds, and we don't need to be going to these rich people. The government, we went to all these different people, and, they look at this and they go, yep, we want to do this. And so what I have found since 1993 to today, 15 years of intensively doing this, I gave up my medical career. I gave up $300,000 a year in income as a physician to do this for free, I might add. I'm not paid. And what I found is that the people in powerful positions, they are too intimidated by the task, but the people aren't. So what we did was create a nonprofit so that people could contribute to it, because a corporation can't take in money from the public without going through a $2 million initial public offering, which has to go through the SEC, and they wouldn't allow it because the SEC is mobbed up with these government interests. So what I have found is that this is the best vehicle at looking at this to combine all the interests of the public with these brilliant scientists. And let me give you an example of what we found. A few years ago, I identified a man who had been in, he's a scientist who was under contract, and I really can't go into a lot of detail here because it's very sensitive, who had developed one of these free energy systems for one of the major military installations under contract as an independent contractor. It was funded, but when he reached the point of success where it was operating, some spooks came in, some intelligence people came in, and ordered the colonel who had funded it to close the project down. That project has now been offered to the Orion project on a silver platter.
Really?
By the way, this same scientist had his work independently reproduced at one of the top government laboratories in the world, and was overseen by one of the top 5 government scientists in the United States, and it was independently reproduced and proven. He's willing to work with us to do this, but we can't do it without some funding support. And you say, well, wouldn't some of the people out there who claim they're concerned about the environment fund this? You would think so, but they actually don't end up stepping up to the plate. They always end up putting money in planting trees and a river basin somewhere, when in reality you can plant trees forever, but if we're destroying the biosphere, it isn't going to help. So we're going to have these out-of-the-box sciences and technologies supported, and the only way I can see getting the support to get these scientists in one place under one roof, and also I might add where the synergy comes together. For example, this man I just described can be combined with about half a dozen others who have similar breakthroughs, but they don't know each other except through our network, and they're all over the United States, and some of them are overseas. We want to have a sort of the initial sort of small campus here where these people can be supported, protected, and also provided the fabrication and the materials resources so that they can quickly, synergistically bring their talents together and come out with these amazing energy solutions. We think this is preeminently doable, but it's going to take the public getting behind it, because what I have found, you asked the genesis of this decision of forming the OrionProject.org, is that we found that so many people who are wealthy or in government who give lip service to their concern about the environment and energy crisis, when you ask them to actually step up to the plate on these technologies, they go, oh boy, that's too big of a fish to fry, and we don't want to do it.
Right.
And so I think that the people are more pure-hearted than powerful, and most wealthy people are. I'm not saying there are no wealthy people who aren't helping us, because actually we have a few angel funders who have already committed some $500,000 to this initial $3 million budget. So I think that, there are good people, but I think we're going to have a lot of shoulders on the wheel, and this is the way we see to make it happen.
Stephen, let's get specific for our audience. How many people do you already have on your team, and specifically, what is the Orion Project's goal?
Well, the Orion Project, which is a nonprofit, and people should go to theorionproject.org, is designed to pull together all these scientists, and we have identified more than a dozen. I mean, I'll go through all the different ones, but
have they agreed? Have they agreed to come on board?
Who not only have agreed, but we're actively working with them now.
Okay.
But it's interesting. People can only take their scientific development so far if they're sitting in a garage or a basement, or if they're like this man who had been doing things with the government. It gets to a certain point where it begins to work, and then they pull the plug on all the funding. And so what are you going to do? And, of course, big corporations end up doing the same thing as the government. They end up burying and suppressing these breakthroughs, and that's not a conspiracy theory. It's an absolutely provable fact. So how are you going to get these things together? And that's what we're saying. I'll give you another example. The people, there have been many people over the years that have gotten water broken down into Brown's gas, hydrogen and oxygen, that will run a car or run a generator. Now, the only way that'll happen where you don't have to use huge amounts of electricity is to use Tesla-like coils and really advanced electronics to pull in the energy from the zero-point energy field to break up the hydrogen and oxygen. But we're working with several different teams that have successfully done that. But that has to be then put into some kind of a system where you have, say, a generator running off the shower wastewater of your home. Every home creates 400 gallons of wastewater a day. Most of it is gray water from showers and sinks that could be put through a charcoal filter, and you could run your home on a generator. The only pollution from burning this gas is zero. It's water vapor, basically, which can go through a condenser to go back into the system. So, what you have here are these sort of breakthroughs. Stan Meyer had done this years ago and had a car running on water, and then he died mysteriously and suddenly. Some believe he was killed. And you can look at the history of this. So how are you going to do that? Well, what we did with the Disclosure Project, and people can see this at disclosureproject.org, was to combine hundreds of these military and top-secret witnesses and come forward with enough clout and protection and public support so that we weren't harmed. And we have to now do the same thing, not with just testimony and government documents, but with these actual sciences, because the world is truly in an environmental and energy crisis, an emergency. And this is exactly why the Orion Project was established. The OrionProject.org was established specifically to protect, support, empower these scientists and engineers and bring together the best minds possible to come out with these initial energy solutions so that we can begin to move them out at least within the next year and a half or two. And because we really don't have time to wait 20 years, 30 years, 50 years for these sort of solutions, and as good as solar and wind are, they're never going to be sufficient to meet the energy needs of this planet practically. We have got to start looking at these out-of-the-box physics and solutions, which, by the way, have existed for decades and continually end up being suppressed and shoved subterranean underground. And I think we have to now bring all that hidden truth and all these secret knowledges out to the public. And I think the public is now at a stage where they're saying, we really do need a definitive breakthrough, and let's support this, what frankly is a very modest, when you look at R&D budgets, a very modest research and development program for these sort of energy solutions.
You mentioned about wind, solar, and I'm going to mention biofuels. Are they becoming archaic then? Is that what you're saying? They're not going to serve what we need?
Well, not only do they not serve, the biofuels are worse than oil, frankly. They're terrible. The net carbon effect and effect on the environment from biofuels are worse, much worse than if you just pumped oil up out of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And I think anyone with any scientific background will tell you that. That's just a sop being thrown to Archer Daniels Midland Corporation into its pork barrel politics. Wind and solar are good, but they're not going to be able to provide adequate power to run the planet sufficiently with 6 billion people soon enough. These things, if you have a generator that's accessing what's called the quantum electromagnetic flux field that's in the space all around us, and this is what Tesla was talking about. You could have a generator that's sitting there like your heat pump is at your house, running your entire home and probably generating enough power for 4 or 5 of your neighbors' homes at very low cost and zero cost for the energy. If I wanted to convert my home to where it was truly off the grid with a total, all of its energy needs, heating, cooling, with wind or solar, I'd have to spend around $100,000 to do that, and people aren't going to do that. They can't afford it. So we have to come out with more affordable, practical, truly high-tech solutions, and we know it's possible to do it. Of course, the reason these things haven't come out over the last 50 to 100 years is because there's a $200 trillion asset base of oil and gas and coal that a handful of large corporations and wealthy families own and control, and those same individuals end up running the world and making all the policy decisions. So unfortunately, getting the solution out is a huge problem. But I think that the only way we're going to do it is to involve the public. The public have to be behind this. They have to be educated, and they also have to begin to financially support it. If the average person listening to this interview gave to the Orion project a tax-deductible donation equal to what they spent on lattes and junk food and eating out and whatnot for a month, say $100, we would be able to do this probably within a year and have these answers for the public. And no force on earth will stop us from disclosing them. We have a track record of disclosing these difficult issues.
I know you
and
do.
No amount of threat made to me or my team will stop us. I mean, the only way they're going to stop me from doing this is if they carry me out 1st feet in a coffin. So,
they've tried.
Yeah, they've tried and failed. So, that's it. And I think that we have to have that kind of dauntless resolution and focus in order to do this. And the public have to help us, though, because, frankly, we really can't do it by ourselves. And I have spent so much time explaining these things to the high and the mighty. I recently met with a head of state and a royal in Europe and all this stuff, and they're very interested. But when you ask them to actually get behind something like this that's this controversial, that's going to step on so many toes in the powerful economic and industrial complex, they end up going, well, you know what, you better talk to someone else about it. Same thing when I talk to powerful government people, just like the Clintons. I mean, the Clintons basically put their tail between their legs and ran when Lawrence Rockefeller, who had all this karmic guilt about Standard Oil and the oil industry, hosted them at his ranch, and I was there briefing them on all this stuff, begging them to disclose this information in 1993, 15 years ago. And Hillary stopped the briefing and said, no, you won't, and stopped it right then and there. Lawrence told me that, she absolutely wouldn't let it go forward any further. And Bill Clinton eventually told one of his good friends that, they were very supportive of this information being disclosed, but they were convinced that he'd end up like Jack Kennedy if he pursued it. And I burst out laughing. I really did. I thought he was joking. This good friend of Bill Clinton's came to my home and said this, and I went, you have got to be kidding. This is like a bad John le Carre novel. But in reality, I found out later he was seriously concerned about that. So what happened is that it sort of devolved, if I hate to use that word, onto the shoulders of nobodies like me. And I mean, because I'm just a country doctor here in Virginia. And I think that what we realize now is that the old adage, if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. There's no truer time than now where that expression has its manifestation, because we are really going to have to be the leaven that raises this civilization. I doubt it's going to come from our leaders, and I think we better not sit on our hands waiting for them. I think we better take this empowerment moment for ourselves and support the OrionProject.org and get this solution out there, because I really don't think the government or big corporations are going to do it.
How much of every dollar that anybody gives is going to the project, to the project, the Orion Project?
Oh, it'd be 100%, because our total budget for everything is only $3 million, and that's a whole staff of a dozen engineers and everything. I mean, everyone's living on a nominal whatever, and it's to pay for the fabricating and the materials. 100% of it would go there. It's absolutely lean.
So on the website, though, the OrionProject.org, you have a list of imagines. I just want to cover a couple of them. Yes. You cover everything from a world where every home and every village has its own clean source of electrical energy, to transportation running off of clean power plants using no source of fuel. You ask us to imagine equatorial rainforests protected from slash and burn subsistence farming and logging, and the possibility of 100% recycling, because the energy cost of transporting recycled materials approaches zero.
That's right.
So, and I love that. I love that you had that on the Orion Project. Imagine, imagine, imagine. So we have got to get from, right now, we've got to get from imagining anything anymore to the actualization. Correct?
That's right. That's correct. And I'll give you another really great example of one of the scientists we're working with. He's a man who has worked for about 40 years in this area and has created solid-state electromagnetic systems that pull this energy out of the electromagnetic field that's all around us. And, he's about the time his systems have always gotten to the point where they could actually go somewhere, people have come in and pulled the funding on it and killed it, just like this other government scientist. We saw the same thing with Stan Meyer's breakthroughs. We see the same thing with some of the technologies that have dealt with extracting energy from the temperature around us. A lot of people don't realize, for example, that a heat pump is about 4 to 6 times over unity, meaning it creates 4 to 6 times more work than you have to put in electricity because it's exchanging energy with the temperature of the environment. That's what they're called, a heat pump, where you can turn those into electric generators. It takes a lot of work and know how to do it. But imagine if you had something that was a very efficient version of that was 10 times over unity generating electricity instead of generating cooling. Well, that is a matter of engineering, and we also have a team working on that we've already started to fund. So all of these are technically feasible, and when you have that, all of a sudden you realize your car, your home, your industries can begin to run on completely clean, non-polluting sources of energy that are free. And the free part is the problem. I recently met with a man who is anyway, he's worked closely with the Bush administration and the nuclear industry, and he said, the problem with these solutions, he knew about them, was that they're too good. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, they would upset the current people who have a lot of vested interest. And I said, yes, that's exactly the point. If we don't change this whole dynamic, we're headed for the scrap heap of history as a civilization. He says, yes, you're right. He says, 3 years ago I wouldn't have met with you, this man told me, who works very closely with the Bush administration. He says, now I'm convinced you're absolutely right, and we're going to have to find a way to bring these things out. He says, but you have taken on the mother of all strategic, sticky wickets here. And I said, but that's, somewhat, we've got to do it. And I honestly don't think, I know I can't do it by myself because I'm not an engineer. I know that our strategic leadership team that I head, with these scientists and with lots of people, 100,000, 200,000 people, whatever it takes in the public, making very reasonable contributions to this effort, that we can do it, and we can do it in a fairly short amount of time because we're not starting from zero here. For example, here's a great example. A lot of people may not have heard this, but the Kowalski frost experiment that was done, I believe, in the late 1920s in Germany, where they literally took an electromagnetic signal and put it on a copper box that inside of it had a pure 100-millimeter cube of pure quartz crystal. And it began to resonate. When they hit the right frequency of this radio frequency, this crystal began to grow. Nothing added to it. It just began to expand. And when it reached a certain point, this entire heavy box and the crystal in it just floated and was levitating above the bench. This was published in a mainstream radio frequency journal in the late 1920s, and we have all the specifications for recreating that experiment. And that was about 80 years ago. And this is not science fiction. This is all within the realm of possibility, and we have spent 15 years collecting all this information and all of these plans and identifying all the living scientists who understand these technologies who are willing to work on them. Now the question is, will the public support us?
Right. Final question really, how did you get the name the Orion Project? My curiosity was very strong to that.
Yes, well, we had an experience up in Joshua Tree. I mentioned at cseti.org, cseti.org, we do these training expeditions for ambassadors to the universe, and we were up in Joshua Tree Wilderness in November, and we always have all these electromagnetic sensors with us, and including kind of radar and laser detectors like you'd use to see where the highway patrolmen are, but they pick up the energy when an ET craft is about to come through the crossing point of light or is sending energy towards the group. And so we have these portable electronic detectors. Well, I became aware that there was way out in space in the direction of Orion an ET craft that was out there because we were seeing these brilliant flashbulb lights that were in that area of space. And so I had a rose quartz, a beautiful angel skin rose quartz sphere that I held up in that direction. And we were all in this very elevated state of consciousness. And all of a sudden, this energy started flowing through that crystal and through everyone in the group resonating. It was an oscillating field. Everyone could feel it. And all this detector started going off. And it went off for over 23 minutes in this very, very interesting coded sequence. And it wasn't like it was a message like Morse code. It was like a non-local, profound, transformative download of energy to everyone in that group and through us into the earth and throughout humanity. We could all feel that. And it was all emanating out of Orion. And we have this actually recorded, and it'll be out soon up on our cseti.org website, this amazing sequence of tones that came through from the Orion sector of space. Well, towards the end of this night, maybe, I don't know, an hour or a half hour later, we were just looking up at Orion's belt and Orion's sword, and it was crystal clear night out in Joshua Tree. And it was so beautiful, and all of us were in this excited, beautiful state of consciousness. And this is a wonderful experience for people to come on if they've never done anything like this. And all of a sudden, I had one of these high-powered lasers, and I started signaling into Orion, and it started signaling back. And it did this for about 10 minutes, where there were these brilliant, almost like bursts of bright white light that would signal back and forth coming out of Orion. And it was such a beautiful experience with what I know was a very cosmically conscious, in-tune civilization that was out in that part of space, that it inspired me to name the project the Orion Project.
That's phenomenal. Do you take people out to Joshua Tree? Do you take people on these tours of your cosmic consciousness so they can become more broadened in their understanding of what you're doing?
Oh, yes. In fact, we'll be doing that again in November of this year, and also at Mount Shasta in California.
Really?
Around Labor Day, and it's open to the public. And, of course, there's a limited number of people. But we do this 4 or 5 times a year, and it's a training. It's not a tour at all. It's actually where people are trained to be able to become ambassadors in this state of pure consciousness so that they can form a team where they live and go out into the stars and make this kind of contact. And we have trained thousands of people around the world who are doing it. It's an amazing, beautiful project.
I know that you have...
if people are interested in that, they can find out about that at cseti.org.
That was going to be my next question. So it's cseti.org. It's SETI.org. You know, just before I got on to interview you, I want to read something that I just got an email. I have no idea who it came from, but it was signed the Star Elders. And it says, we live in an age of prophecy during which humanity has the opportunity to reawaken to timeless, interdependent relationship with the cosmos. Without a doubt, we are here at this special time to help fulfill an awesome and delicately orchestrated plan to align Earth with the cosmos and humanity with the universal heart. We are here to awaken to the full potential of being authentic, aware human beings. It's time to drop your cosmic remote control, get out of that visualization chair, and get to work. Spirit helps those who help themselves. Spirit works right now, not yesterday, not tomorrow. Quit watching what is going on and take action. Use your power to do something about the imbalances in your world. And it was signed the Star Elders.
Well, that's right. And I mean, I don't know who those folks are, but they're completely correct in everything they said. And, you know, we're at the point now where people have, you know, one of the problems with our society today is that with the computers and internet and TV, everyone's become very passive and almost defeatist and apathetic. And people have to realize that creates its own reality, that we have to be engaged. We have to actually put one foot in front of the other, not worry about how daunting the task is. Believe me, I mean there are times, you know, my wife and I go on this 4-mile walk every day out here in the Blue Ridge Mountains where we are near the University of Virginia, and we go, God, this is overwhelming sometimes, what we're trying to accomplish. But you just have to put one foot in front of the other and go forward. And it'll become infinitely easier if we understand that we're all connected together in this great unfolding of the human future and human potential, and that the attainment of that and the creating of a sustainable and peaceful and abundant civilization is well within our grasp if we come together and support each other and do it for the right reasons and with the right intent, and it will happen. And that's what we're here on this planet right now to do. And if we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? And if we don't do it, who is? So,
right.
You know, if not now, who? And if not us? You know, if not now, when? If not us who? I mean, we can't start looking around to other people. And I think in that sense, we have to become truly accountable for the earth and her future, because, there's the whole concept of 7 generations yet unborn, the whole Native American tradition. But I think right now we're in a quantum moment of the earth's and humanity's history. Indeed. Where we're accountable for 20,000 generations yet unborn, for the next 500,000 years of advanced civilization on earth. That's what we're responsible for. We have to say, look, everything we're doing is going to impact that future. And that's why we have to come together and support each other, not view ourselves as sort of lonely, isolated, that if we come together in numbers and really support this, not, and also I would ask not just for the people who can help us financially, which everyone can make $10, $20, $50, $100 donation to the OrionProject.org, but also to help us network this information to their neighbors and friends, and also help us identify more of these scientists. I bet there are people listening who know of inventors and scientists who are sitting there who have either already tried to do this and succeeded, but then, hit the brick wall of the whole industrial financial complex shutting them down, who need to be networked to this project so that we pull the absolute best people on the planet together to these solutions. And if we do that and work together, I think we're going to be successful.
Well, with you heading it up, I have no doubt that we will. I pray that World Puja becomes a tremendous bridge for you to go from the imagination of all of this into the actualization of all of this, Stephen. And I am so very grateful, and I have been so very grateful to all of your work for oh so very long.
Well, thank you. This is the first time I have publicly spoken ever of the OrionProject.org was today at this interview. We waited till the World Puja Network to do it.
Thank you very much. I am honored and grateful. And I want to remind our audience again, use your discernment. I'm not here to force or impart my wisdom upon yours. Visit the OrionProject.org. See for yourself, feel for yourself, know for yourself. And while you're at it, you can certainly visit the www.disclosureproject.org. If you haven't read Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, what an incredible book and eye-opening, so you'll have more understanding of this incredible man, Dr. Stephen Greer. Stephen, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thank you so much for speaking of the Orion Project first here. We are honored, and you are always welcome back here at any time you so desire.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your support.
My pleasure. I remind my audience again to remember to love yourselves, love this world. Let us unify as one united state of being for the first time ever in humanity's existence. This is your host, Maureen Moss, on The Power of Life, again reminding you also to love yourself. It's the only way the world knows how to love you. Namaste.